Good morning, Faye.
Good morning.
Good morning, Faye. This is Christina Zaman. How are you?
I am good. It's so nice to finally speak with you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just so you know, I'm recording this call as part of our 50th anniversary oral history project.
Certainly.
And
that's good.
I'm just going to say a quick tag here. This is Christina Zaman, Head of Special Collections and Archives at Georgia State University. And I'm talking with Faye Phillips, former GSU archive staff member. So welcome, Faye.
Thank you for including me in this important occasion. I can't believe it's been 50 years.
I can't believe it's been 50 years either. So I just have a few questions to ask you, and I know I had sent you the questions ahead of time.
Yes.
So hopefully there are no surprises.
None.
All right. So when were you hired by Georgia State University, and how long were you there?
Well, I had a varied time framework with the archives. I first came to work there, I believe it was in late 1971 or early 1972. And then I left in 1975 for that year to work for the Georgia State Nurses Association, which was one of the organizations we collected the records for. And then I came back to the archives and worked there in 1976 and 1977. And in 1978, I went to the Atlanta Historical Society, which you will know is the Atlanta History Center.
Yep.
I'm not done. In 1979, I came back to be a graduate student in the GSU History Department. And in fall of 1979, I was hired to work at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, UNC, as the Technical Services Archivist in the Southern Historical Collection, and I also went to library school. So I didn't really settle down in my career until I got to Louisiana State University in 1986.
Well, that's a great track, and you are not alone. You aren't the first person that I've heard sort of boomerang, I guess, is the word.
Well, yeah, and at that time it was, I don't know, it just seems like that's the era when people like David were training a lot of people who advanced in the archival profession because of people like him.
Right. Yeah, and he absolutely mentored and trained so many folks in the profession over his years.
I know. Yes.
So while you were at Georgia State, and that you may have a couple of these, what were your positions and responsibilities?
I began, of course, as office clerical staff, according to my position description, but soon got the opportunity because of David, to do a little bit of everything. He made it very easy for all of us to learn and grow, and gave us more responsibilities. That was his way of teaching. He even sent us alone on collecting trips to Union. One time he sent me to the state AFL-CIO in Raleigh, North Carolina. They thought the kindergarten had showed up. They just couldn't get over how young I was and why did he send me? But it was a wonderful opportunity. And David was always teaching us, and all of us who worked for him in and out, and many of whom I don't remember as student assistants, eventually came professional archivists.
Yep, absolutely. So you may have sort of answered this, but why did you decide to work in well, I guess at that time it was the Southern Labor Archives, and what attracted you to the work at Georgia State?
Well, I had been trying to complete my BA degree at GSU since 1967 by working at various office jobs in Atlanta during the days and attending classes at night. As you know, Georgia State was a commuter college then. There were no dormitories. One day, one of my fellow students in a history class, we were talking about how hard it was to go to night school and work all day. And she said, well, we can get jobs on campus, and that'll make it easier to attend classes. So that's what I did. I went over to the employment office, and they interviewed me, asked me what my major was, American history, and did I enjoy being in the library? Yes. So she sent me to interview at the Southern Labor Archives, and I must admit I had no foggy idea what that was. But it was a new department in the library. And on that day, I first met David. And I must tell you, out of all the job interviews I've had over the past 50 years, that was the most fun job interview I've ever had.
Yeah, that was David.
That was David, yeah.
Yeah. He's the most fun person to interact with and have a conversation with.
Yeah, I mean, he could be deadly serious when it was required, and he could talk to anybody and be respected by senators, congressmen, presidents. You know, he could go from dealing with undergraduate students all the way up to dealing with President George Bush.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was it like when you worked here, and what was the campus like?
Well, the campus was kind of beginning to develop, you might say. There was the library and Sparks Hall, which had the ramps, because it had been a parking garage. So it was very small. Most students were part-time, like me, going to night school when I first started in the fall of 1966. And I don't remember the history of the major additions, but it grew a lot during the 70s. And after I left Atlanta in 1979, it grew substantially. But for students like me, campus life was very minimal.
Right, because it was a commuter campus and there wasn't a lot to the campus.
Yeah, I remember a strange event that happened around, I want to say when I was in graduate school there, they had some new organizations called sororities and fraternities. I'd never heard of such things.
Yeah, and I think they were primarily service-oriented, correct?
They were very service-oriented, and of course they still are today, but it was not an experience I was familiar with because I grew up in the country of North Georgia.
Right. So what was the library like? And the library at that time was still fairly new, I believe.
It was small. It was, growing and was very, like any college library should be. It was very well supported. The Southern Labor Archives was brought to life through the work of my mentors in the history department, Merle Reed and Gary Fink. Gary Fink was my master's professor. By the time I arrived, David was already getting significant collections. There wasn't an official university archives until later. I don't remember what year it was official. But, when you're on a college campus, you collect historical materials or anything that might eventually go into a university archives.
Right. Yeah, it's been a little unclear as to, like you said, when exactly the university archive became official, but of course there was collecting going on of the university.
Always.
Yeah. And
David was very, very intent on that, hey, don't throw that away. That'll go in the archives.
Exactly.
It could be a flyer. It could be a flyer for a student event. But he was right.
So what kinds of challenges, since this was, again, very new, this is the beginning of the department, what kinds of challenges did the archives face?
I think on campus, the archives basically had difficulty becoming recognized as an academic function. The labor union actually, welcomed David more so than most of the campus departments did. They just didn't understand what we did or why. And back in those days, archival supplies, Hollander boxes, always seemed hard to acquire for one reason or another. Sometimes it was our budget, and sometimes it was just that they didn't make enough boxes for all the people who were trying to buy them.
Right. Yeah, it was a much smaller business.
Mm-hmm. It was. And it was, companies went in and out of business. So.
Right. So, what was the actual space or the archives like, and were you here for one of the moves or space reorganizations? And I believe maybe you were.
Actually, right on the on the fringes of that. When I first got there, there was we had a couple of offices, but I don't remember it being anything big. But when I went to work for the Georgia Nurses Association in 1975 or 6, can't remember which, that was when the archives moved over to the first Urban Life building. Mm-hmm. So when I got back, the space was much improved. Actually, we had a shelving area for the first time, and people had windows in their offices. It was really nice.
So when you were in the library, there was no shelving for the collection?
Not that I remember, not like what we think of today. I mean, I know there was some storage, but, and there's that story about David had one box of archival material, and I don't really think they thought, I don't think the library administration thought we'd last. But that's just my impression.
Yeah, I know David mentioned that when he arrived, when he was hired, there wasn't even an office space. They didn't even know where to put him.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
And when I asked the HR person I was interviewed by what the archives was, she couldn't tell me. She said, well, it's just part of the library.
Well, you kind of touched on the next question, which is, how was the department viewed and supported by the library administration?
I think it never surprised me where I've been all these years in various different places that you have good administrations that support you and administrations that are going through difficult times, and so the support goes away. And that's what we went through. David, of course, always seemed happy with the support he was getting, and he was always working on budgets and asking for more money. I don't really, that first years, don't remember any serious issues. He was able to hire student assistants. But because he was so successful at collecting, it seemed like we always needed more staff and more student workers, which we sometimes got, sometimes didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were the department priorities, and how did they change while you were there, or did they change?
Well, from the time I was there, from 72 to 79, no, it was all labor union work. We did bring in Georgia State Nurses, which was not exactly a labor union. It certainly wasn't affiliated with the AFL-CIO. So it mainly stayed on workers' organizations from the time I was there.
Right. So what do you think was your greatest accomplishment while you were there?
Well, I think getting involved with the Georgia State Nurses Associations and building, I don't know if y'all still collect their records or not, but there were Nurses Associations records that we did collect. So I got to be involved in that. I think my greatest accomplishment, though, was getting to know the person that I did my master's thesis about, Carmen Lucia. She was with the United Hatters, Cap, and Millinery Workers. And Carmen actually became one of the very first women to be a vice president in a union, a national union. And she did, I mean, you can look in Gary Fink's book, Biographical the biographical directory of American labor, and you can read my little squib that I wrote about her, or you can read my thesis if you're really interested. But she was a fascinating person, and I got to go and learned how to do oral history and working with Carmen and interviewing her. And y'all have the tapes, or you've probably digitized them by now. But that was a fantastic opportunity, and I learned so much from her. And, of course, David, and he was so supportive of my work in that area. And I got my master's degree in history.
So the next question you've already sort of answered, so I don't know if you have anything further to add, but can you describe the evolution of the department, such as positions, growth, or structural changes? So we've kind of touched on this a little bit. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah. I don't have anything significant to add there. I know that what was his Les Huff because David left fairly quickly and went back to Texas to be director of the Texas State Archives. And Les Huff did change things and managed to grow the department, but I was already gone by then. So we pretty much stayed small and concentrated on labor unions during my time there.
Right. Yeah. So where were you getting your materials and collections, and who was your donor base? Again, you've kind of already answered this, but if there's anything to add?
Right. Really, while I was there, as I said, it was mainly the state AFL-CIO and their affiliated unions. And we were successful with union staff like Carmen, Lucia, and other groups such as the nurses associations. And those were the ones that I was involved with, and I know that it grew after that.
And were there any major events or momentous occasions while you worked there?
Well, for me, becoming a mentee of David Gracie was a significant event in my life. And I'm sure there are plenty of us who can say that, but that was one of the most important events of my career. But for the department, becoming an accepted part of the university was really important, because you're not going to survive if you aren't. And then, of course, David's impression he made on the state AFL-CIO unions.
Yeah. And what challenges did you face, and were you able to overcome them?
Mine were mostly personal, trying to work full-time and complete BA and MA degrees. That was a pretty tough, hard thing to do, but we did it. I was not alone. But the challenges within the department, like I said, I think we managed pretty well, but I was only there for a very short time.
Right. So what was the most unique item that you worked with?
I thought about that after I read your questions, and we did a lot of 20th century material with the unions, of course, but there were some older union materials and artifacts that popped up from the 1920s and 30s. And that was, really interesting to see, because it was a part of American history I was just learning about. And then there were the hilarious things, like opening a box of union records and finding that somebody had thrown in a packet of brand new men's boxer shorts. Who knows why? They were just packing up. And David used to tease us and say, "Hey, at least they were new and clean."
Well, we still find them, but they're not always new and clean.
I know, that's what he was trying to tell us. And I'm sure, well, the things that I've seen over the years, oh my God, especially the snakes in the barns. But that was my first experience with that. But I was really impressed by the union history and seeing the artifacts and the union records. That was a great part of my education.
So did you have a favorite collection, and what was it?
Carmen, of course, Carmen Lucius, and she just became a great friend, and it was really, I was so impressed by her and the women that she worked with. They were very important in the union activities, although they didn't always get credit. Sound familiar?
Exactly. So what was your most memorable story from your time at Georgia State?
Well, David, of course. Just everything about him. I mean, I sound like a hero worshiper, and I am. He was, and you talk to any of us who were mentees of David, and you'll get the same reaction. I'm sure you already have.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And he talked fondly of you as well. He said, you have to make sure that you get in touch with Faye. It just took me a little while to track you down.
Well, I wasn't hiding, but, I stopped being very active in the archival associations in the early 90s because it was just, I had so much responsibility as the associate dean. It was just, I didn't have time to go traipsing around and making speeches everywhere.
So you touched on this a little bit, but my final question for you is, where did you go after Georgia State, and what was your career like?
Well, David, as I have said multiple times, he really influenced my career, and I was very fortunate that he and I stayed friends throughout our lives. In the fall of 1979, I was hired as the Technical Services Archivist at UNC Chapel Hill. And then I also was accepted into the library school there. After, I'm trying to remember the date, I want to say 1982, you remember Kay Lanning Minshew?
Yes.
Do you remember? Okay. She worked at the Troup County, Georgia Archives, and she and I established that archives.
Okay.
We worked together at Chapel Hill, and we worked together there. Yeah.
Excellent.
From there, 1985, I went to the National Archives, which I hated because we worked, it may not sound like it, but we worked really hard. And Kay and I worked really hard at Troup County. And when I got to the National Archives, they had gone through this phase of wanting to bring in archivists that were trained somewhere other than at the National Archives. But they didn't want us to have, we didn't get to do anything. I've never been so bored in all my life. So I got an opportunity through a friend of mine to go up to the United States Senate and be an archivist for retiring senators and packing up their records and sending them to the universities. One of which happened to be, did I work what?
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask if you worked at all with Don Ritchie.
Yes, of course. Yeah, and the Historical Office and Karen Paul, all those people. Yeah, it was a great experience. I loved working at the Senate. But then, because I had packed up the boxes out of Senator Russell Long of Louisiana's office, I got an opportunity to work at Louisiana State University. I was hired to run, one of the departments, which was called the Louisiana Collection, which was archives and manuscripts and books. And I retired as the Associate Dean of the LSU Libraries in 2012 and was named Professor Emerita.
Wow.
That's what I've been doing. Wrote a few books along the way, made a few speeches, trained a lot of archivists.
What a great career.
It has been. I'm still working. I have my own consulting firm, and I do appraisals. So, it's a good life. I'm lucky.
Well, Kay, not Kay. Sorry, you said Kay.
That's okay. Kay and I would always answer to anything that sounded like Faye or Kay, because it was very confusing that we had some similar names.
Well, Faye, thank you so much for doing the interview. I am actually going to stop the recording, but I would like to talk with you a little bit more, if that's okay. Can you hold on the line
Sure.
for a sec? Okay,
I
hold on.
certainly can. Thank you.
Okay, you